If true, this changes everything. Multiple sources confirm the New York Mets are interested in Brandon Lowe, and if they make a deal for him with Tampa Bay, we'll see a bunch of changes. However, fans don't care whatsoever. They want this deal regardless because of how good Lowe is, and that's exactly what we're going to dive into only here on Mets Digest. I'm your host today, Mike Duda. We'll talk Brandon Lowe, but first we got to talk about some subscribers, and that being the fact that 69.2% of you that watch these videos aren't one. So please do me a favor, just a favor here at Mets Digest, and hit that free subscribe button. That way we can bring content to you about the amazing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kick it off. Starting it off with an insider, this being Joel Sherman of both the New York Post and an MLB Network insider, who says, quote, the Mets have showed interest in Rays all-star second baseman Brandon Lowe. Now you hear the word Rays, the Tampa Bay Rays, and you think, well, we just talked about them yesterday. That CBS Sports article said that they were in the middle when it comes to being buyers, maybe sellers. They're having a pretty solid season, right? Haven't they made deals? Yeah, they have. They went out and acquired Brian Baker for basically a first-round pick, a competitive balance round A pick, 37th overall. That is practically a first-round pick. They traded for a pitcher, giving up a first-round pick earlier in the month, back on the 10th. But at the time, Tampa was 50-43, 7 games above 500. They were in the second wildcard slot in the American League East, half a game up on the Red Sox and a game and a half on the Mariners, who were in fourth on the outside looking in. But everything has changed. Now, they're just 1 game above 500. They're 2.5 out of the wild card, and they're not only trailing Boston, but also the Texas Rangers. So they're in a lot different of a situation now, and they are now in fourth in the American League East. So a lot has changed, but they still made another deal recently. Today, on the 29th, they acquired Nick Fortes from the Miami Marlins. So you think, all right, they're going to be buyers. Why would they be giving up Brandon Lowe? Well, not necessarily. Nick Fortes was not necessarily a buyer's move because they traded their catcher in Danny Jansen. They gave him away to the Brew Crew in exchange for a prospect, as with slugging backstop William Contreras playing through a fractured left middle finger this season and struggling to a .684 OPS, the Brewers struck a deal for catcher depth by acquiring veteran Jansen from Tampa Bay. Jansen, who is from Appleton, Wisconsin, got off to a slow start at the plate this season for Tampa, but he's picked it up lately. In 48 games since May 8th, he has a .795 OPS with 10 homers, and they gave up a prospect in exchange. Jadhir Arenamo, who is 21 years old, is a versatile infielder who slashed .297, .355, .463 with 11 homers for High A Wisconsin this season. He was Milwaukee's number 24 prospect per MLB Pipeline. This was yesterday, so Tampa went out and they acquired Fortes to go get an MLB catcher today to replace Jansen. So Fortes, very simply Jansen's replacement. It wasn't necessarily a buying move, and Amaro is now the 25th prospect in the Tampa Bay system. So they traded someone who was struggling. They traded someone who was coming up on the end of his contract to go out and get a prospect, which is what selling teams do. That's the important point here. So in all honesty, Tampa might actually be sellers. Now, I'm going to turn it back to that CBS Sports article we looked at yesterday. They had Tampa, quote, somewhere in the middle. They didn't know if they were going to be buyers or if they were going to be sellers. And this move at the top, they were buyers, but that was a while ago. That was back on the 10th. That is 19 days ago. A lot has changed for Tampa, as you can now see from the standings. They have gotten worse in the standings. They are worse off as a team and have a lot less of a chance to even make the playoffs. So they might actually be sellers. And this move, trading their catcher, shows that actually might be true. So, with that, let's go ahead and turn it to the rumors, going to the experts who are going to talk about the fact that the Mets are interested in Lowe. Starting off with Pat Ragazzo of Sports Illustrated. He's an insider. We've heard from him before. He says, quote, surprise, surprise, the New York Mets currently have a bit of a logjam in their infield, but that hasn't stopped them from showing interest in adding to this area. According to MLB insider Joel Sherman of the New York Post, the Mets have inquired about Tampa Bay Rays all-star second baseman Brandon Lowe. Now, Pat is not the only one who's talked about this. RJ Anderson of CBS Sports, he says, quote, it's to be seen if and how much the Rays sell this deadline, but both the Mets and Astros have shown interest in second baseman Brandon Lowe, according to the New York Post. It's perhaps worth noting that while he's played outfield in the past, he's almost exclusively been stationed at the Keystone the last few seasons. Now that's important because when we turn it back to Ragazzo's quote, we know that the Mets have a jam up in the infield. They have a lot of infielders that's allowing Luis Angel Acuna to basically not play whatsoever. Mark Vientos is having to DH, and the Mets are interested in going out and getting another second baseman, which is a little interesting, but we'll dive into that in just a little bit. As now we'll turn it over to Tim Boyle of the Rising Apple, who also confirms that the Mets want Lowe. He says, quote, Luis Robert has been a major focus of many New York Mets rumors these past days, with Joel Sherman dropping an even more pleasant one on Monday. According to him, the Mets have expressed interest in Tampa Bay Rays second baseman Brandon Lowe, who may be available this week. In a league with three notable players with the name Lowe right now, the other two being Nate, who plays for the Nationals, and Josh, who also plays for the Rays, it's Brandon who would be the most compelling addition to the Mets. The Tampa Bay Rays second baseman is currently on the IL with a foot/ankle tendonitis, but is expected to be back July 30th, which is just tomorrow, when it was first announced that the Rays were open to trading him. Mets fans were quick to fantasize about the possibility. With Sherman's reporting of true interest by the Mets, we can ponder more realistically about what the Mets lineup could look like with him dead center within. So, we've heard a lot about him. He seems like a really, really good player. And yes, obviously the stats are going to back it up. The only thing that I don't like about Brandon Lowe is that throughout his MLB career, which as we see here has been 8 seasons, the same length as Juan Soto for reference, he has had 10 separate IL stints, including 2 this year that have both come from this month, believe it or not. Back on the 11th of July, he went on the 10-day IL with left oblique tightness, retroactive to the 8th, and was activated again on the 18th, so he spent 10 total days on the IL. And of course, that most recent injury that we heard from, that was on the 22nd when he was placed on the 10-day IL as well, with left ankle/foot tendonitis retroactive to the 20th. Again, he is likely going to return on the 30th, so that would be another just 10-day injury. Only 20 days on the injured list for Brandon Lowe, which is why he's had such a good number of at-bats at 323. And those stats are nice. OPS at 800, that is awesome. That's basically Jeff McNeil level. Jeff McNeil is hovering around that right now. OBP above the 300 mark at 320, batting average just at about 270, 19 homers, 50 RBIs. This stat sheet is also very similar to a guy like Brandon Nimmo. So, offensively, you definitely want a guy like Brandon Lowe, but the only question would be about who you're giving up and what do you do in the infield? Well, ideally, unfortunately, you're going to have to say ideally here you give up one of those 4 infield prospects. Beatty, Mauricio, Vientos, or Acuna. I hope it would be Acuna because as much as I like Acuna, and we gave up Max Scherzer for him, who is a Hall of Fame name, I don't think that he is going to be the best out of the 4. In fact, I think he's unfortunately going to be the worst. We've seen good signs from Mark Vientos. He had a grand slam last night. Ronnie Mauricio obviously had a great game on Sunday, and Brett Beatty has been red hot offensively and defensively. But when you talk about Acuna, he simply just hasn't played. So, hopefully the Rays would be interested in getting Acuna. You trade Acuna and maybe another piece or 2 and go out and acquire Brandon Lowe. Now, does this create a jam up in the infield? Potentially, because you still have Vientos, Beatty, and Mauricio. But you can put Beatty at third base, you can DH Vientos and Mauricio, Lowe at second, and Jeff McNeil can stay in center field. So I don't mind that whatsoever. You can also flip-flop. You can put Mauricio at third base some days and have Beatty DH. It depends on the lefty-righty matchups. There's a lot that you can do. You can get very creative with this, but by getting Brandon Lowe, you don't have to worry about that center field piece, which of course, as you guys well know, I don't want Luis Robert and I don't want Cedric Mullins. So I think this is a good way to solve it without even going out and getting a center fielder. You know my guy is Steven Kwan. I want Kwan, but I don't think he's going to be available. And the fact that Lowe might be available is a good alternative to solving that center field problem while still keeping the defense of Jeff McNeil out there and keeping the majority of those young guys in Vientos and Mauricio and Beatty. And yes, you get rid of Acuna in that scenario, but Acuna is also not a homegrown talent, so you don't have as much, I wouldn't say as much of a love, but you're not as upset to get rid of Acuna as you would be a homegrown talent. Here are the career stats for Lowe. As you can see, he's a 2-time All-Star including this season and 2019 when he finished third in Rookie of the Year voting over there in the American League. He also has been top 10 in MVP voting on 2 separate occasions, so very solid there. And the last reason why I want Brandon Lowe, he has a great contract. It is favorable. 6 years, $24 million. That is basically nothing, although he has a very, very much so back-ended contract, including a club option for 11.5 next year. Again, money doesn't matter. It's Uncle Steve. The Rays have already paid the majority of it, and I think this is a reason why the Rays want to get rid of him. Is Tampa, as you may or may not know, is a team that doesn't like to spend a lot of money. They don't have a lot of money. So $10.5 million and next year possibly $11.5 million, that's a lot of money for Tampa Bay to be spending. It's pennies for the Mets, so it's a lot different, and you have control over him next year. Therefore, I want Brandon Lowe. So let me know in the comment section, do you agree? Would you want Brandon Lowe on the New York Mets? I think it would be a perfect fit. I think it would solve your problems out in center field because you can keep McNeil out there. Then you can platoon Tyrone Taylor in the 8th and 9th inning. He comes in for defense after McNeil, who's been great at the plate, hits. You got Lowe at second. It frees up some space for Beatty, Mauricio, and Vientos, or Acuna if they trade one of the other guys. So let me know, would you be willing to give up one of the 4 guys? Do you want Lowe in the first place? I'm a big fan of this if this were to happen. But again, let me know your thoughts down below. Unfortunately, that's all the time I have for you in today's video. Don't forget to keep staying tuned to Mets Digest, your only spot for everything. Trade rumors, trade deadline, and also keeping up with the New York Mets, who suffered a tough loss last night. Thank you so much as always for watching, and let's go Mets!